Imagine the night falling gently over the city, wrapping everything in a quiet, almost magical dusk. The street lights go out one by one, and silence settles in, not as an absence, but as a gentle presence, comforting, like a cloak that embraces the soul. It is in this deep silence that the strangest and most beautiful thoughts can bloom. Tonight, you will hear a true story, so absurd it feels like a lie. But rest assured, here, the strange is not frightening. It's an invitation to the imagination, a pathway to dreams. A story that will cradle your mind like a soft song whispered in your ear, perfect for the stillness of the night. While the world outside slows down and retreats, there is a special, almost sacred time when the most unexpected ideas begin to take shape. They arrive like whispers, faint voices slipping away from the logic of daily life, transporting us to secret places of the mind, places where reason rests and fantasy has room to breathe. It was precisely in this silent, welcoming setting that Jean-Pierre Brunius, an apparently ordinary man, a methodical, discreet banker, began to entertain a thought that to many might sound like a daydream, or even madness. What if he could build a kingdom, a place of his own, where he could be king, not because he inherited a throne, nor because a nation recognized him, but simply because he chose to be? It may seem like a childish notion, a whim for someone wishing to escape reality, but in truth, it was something profoundly poetic. It was the expression of a quiet longing, a delicate response to loneliness and the complexity of the modern world. Jean-Pierre did not want to rule vast lands or wield power over crowds. He wanted only a space where he could be king, with all the responsibilities and glories that title implied, but also with the freedom that comes from creating something from nothing. The night, with its heavy yet comforting silence, was the perfect stage for this idea to be born. The hours stretched slowly, and while cities around him sank into sleep, Brunius's mind lit up with dreams. He sought no recognition, no official titles. The kingdom he desired was a kingdom of the spirit, a kingdom of imagination. It's curious how silence and solitude can be so fertile for creation. While the outside world raced through its frantic routines, Jean-Pierre slowly sailed across seas of thought, exploring ancient maps, dreaming of forgotten territories, places where no one had dared to plant a flag. In that moment, he was no longer just a banker with an ordinary life. He had become an explorer of possibilities, a creator of invisible worlds. The birth of his kingdom did not depend on soldiers or treaties, but on a steady will and a daring dream, nurtured by the quiet hours of the night. And so, what began as a whisper in the silence transformed into an idea that would forever change the life of Jean-Pierre Brunius. The idea of a place called Enclava, a forgotten island, unclaimed, hidden in the middle of the Danube, between Serbia and Romania. A legal void that, to him, was an irresistible invitation. But before we set foot on that island, take a deep breath, slow down even more, and allow this story to wrap you in its calm and strangeness. An invitation to reflect on what it means to have a kingdom, and whether, perhaps, it doesn't need to exist on any official map to be real. Because, in the end, what is a kingdom if not an idea? A story we tell ourselves and the world. If, in the silence of the night, the idea of a kingdom was born, It is only fair that we now plunge into the even more intimate silence of the one who dreamed it. Jean-Pierre Brunius was not an ordinary man, though at first glance he might have seemed just another discreet figure in the financial world, a banker among many others. But beyond the sober suits and meticulous routine, there lived a restless spirit, a heart that beat with an uncommon hunger, the thirst for something that cannot be bought or sold, something that cannot be measured in figures and balance sheets. Jean-Pierre was, above all, a man of contrasts. While his daily life unfolded among contracts, numbers, and cold negotiations, his mind sailed across seas of daydreams and desires that escaped the logic of the market. It was not unusual for him to lose hours contemplating old maps, studying territories time seemed to have forgotten, searching for empty spaces where reality might give way to fantasy. This banker, with disciplined habits and a reserved personality, hid a dreamer's soul, perhaps even a slightly stubborn one. The stubbornness of someone who refuses to simply accept what is given, and instead seeks what only he can create. Not out of vanity or excessive ambition, but from a deep need to exist in a different way, to leave a unique mark upon the world. As this story unfolds, it is important to understand that Jean-Pierre was no escapist. His kingdom was not a flight from reality, but a conscious construction, a symbolic act of creation. He saw himself not merely as a banker, but as a craftsman of alternative realities, someone willing to challenge the boundaries of the possible through the power of a dream. Perhaps you might imagine that such a man was a misunderstood loner, but there was in Jean-Pierre a serenity that shielded him from the judgment of others. He did not seek applause or public recognition. On the contrary, he cultivated an intimate space where he could simply be himself, a man and his dream, in perfect harmony. It is this contrast that makes his story so fascinating and, in a way, so close to all of us. How many times, even in the most ordinary days, do we feel within ourselves the call for something greater, something that transcends routine and pragmatism? How many of us carry within us a small inner kingdom made of secret desires and infinite possibilities? Jean-Pierre Brunius, then, is more than a banker or an eccentric man. He is the symbol of that human part that refuses to settle, that insists on dreaming even when the world around seems to disbelieve. He is a gentle reminder that within each of us lies an island waiting to be discovered, a territory of silence and imagination where we can, if we wish, become kings. And so, with this understanding of the man behind the idea, we slowly walk toward the next step in this story, the obsession that led him to discover an ownerless island, a piece of land where his fantasy could take shape, a place where he could finally reach out his hand and say, "Here I am king." But this, as you already know, is only the beginning of a journey that transcends maps and borders. It is a voyage into the very heart of the dream, carried by the gentle breeze of a river that crosses continents, and by the silent patience of a man who decided to build his own world. If this story is stirring your imagination in some way, if you feel this calm, this strangeness settling within you, let it find its place there. Let the slow rhythm of this narrative be like a sigh that eases your day, an invitation to contemplation. In the stillness of long afternoons and silent nights, Jean-Pierre Brunius found an unexpected refuge: ancient maps. Aged sheets, their ink faded by time, showed territories the modern world had forgotten or ignored. They were like doors to a parallel universe, where borders were uncertain, names carried a taste of mystery, and possibilities seemed endless. While his colleagues dealt with figures and market strategies, he would lose himself in these landscapes traced by explorers of centuries past. Every curve of a river, every small and forgotten island, every strip of land between nations was a silent promise of a place that belonged to no one, a geographic void ready to be filled with dreams. This obsession was not a mere pastime but an almost spiritual quest. As if, by carefully studying each map, Jean-Pierre could discover not only a physical island but also a space for his own freedom, for his desire to create a kingdom where he could be sovereign, free from the shackles of the real world. He studied the details, compared maps from different eras, and researched forgotten histories of territories that had passed through silent disputes, borders that had changed hands so many times they seemed to dance to their own rhythm. Among these traces of the past, an island in the middle of the Danube began to draw his attention. It was a small, little-known island, located on the border between Serbia and Romania, in a stretch of the river where calm waters and the riverbanks intertwined like fingers touching. An island seemingly without an owner, a point on the map where geography appeared to defy politics. For Jean-Pierre, that island was an invitation, a piece of land where the rules had yet to be written, where he could lay down his will as king. It was a blank space, a silence on the earth, speaking directly to the silence he felt in the nights when the city slept and his thoughts grew vast. This was a delicate, profound moment. His fascination with ancient maps was not just a rational search, but an intimate connection between a man and the idea of a territory he could call his own. It was almost a mute dialogue between him and the land, a slow dance of intentions and dreams. And it was in this atmosphere of contemplation and discovery that Jean-Pierre began to plan his visit to the island. He knew the dream could not remain confined to the worn pages of an atlas. He needed to touch the ground, feel the wind, and hear the sound of the surrounding waters. Before leaving, he allowed himself to imagine what that place might be like. A place that, until then, had existed only in the shadows of maps. A land that needed nothing more than his presence to come alive and gain meaning. And so, in a silent gesture, full of hope and lightness, the banker who dreamed prepared to make his fantasy real. A man who, in the midst of the world's turmoil, chose to slow down and seek a piece of peace, a piece of power, a piece of himself. Let this image rest in your mind for a moment. Ancient maps, faded lines, a hidden island between two nations, and a man who, in silence, decides to be king of a place no one else has claimed. The Danube is a river that seems to carry in its waters not only the current, but millennia-old stories, ancient secrets, and the silence of many who have crossed its banks over time. In the midst of this vast natural setting, where the flow of the river dictates the rhythm of life, Jean-Pierre Brunius found what he was searching for, a forgotten island, lost between Serbia and Romania, that no one claimed as their own. The discovery was no accident. It was the patient result of a silent search, of nights spent examining maps and studying borders. It was a small island, overgrown with brush, scattered with stones, and swept by a constant wind that seemed to whisper stories from the past. A piece of land almost untouched, a space in the world that carried the promise of the unexplored. This island did not appear prominently in official atlases, and its status was delicate. For historical and political reasons, it seemed to have fallen into a kind of limbo, a legal void where sovereignty had never been formally established. For Jean-Pierre, this was more than a detail. It was the key that would unlock the door to his dream. Imagine the moment when he first approached the island. In a rented boat, he glided gently over the calm waters of the Danube, feeling the coolness on his face, the light filtered through the trees, the distant sound of birds that seemed to guard the secret. With every meter, his anticipation grew, but so did a strange serenity that enveloped him. When he stepped onto solid ground, he felt something almost magical. It was not an ordinary patch of earth. It was a territory that seemed to belong to him by its very nature, not by law, but by will. The sensation of owning a piece of the world, even if no one else recognized it, was profoundly liberating. There, in that nothingness that was everything, he began to imagine his kingdom. A simple tent, a flag fluttering in the wind, a coat of arms bearing symbols of freedom and hope. It was the beginning of a creation that transcended geography, a poetic and silent act. That first visit had no pomp or ceremony. There were no crowds, no cameras, no speeches. There was only a man, an island, and the immensity of the river around them. An intimate and almost sacred moment where reality met the dream. But there was also the awareness that it was fragile. A kingdom born in silence, at the edge of the laws of great nations. A kingdom that existed only because someone believed in it. It was a delicate mixture of hope and defiance, of dream and resistance. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Jean-Pierre looked upon what was beginning to be his small world. The island, the river, the wind, all came together to create a serene and powerful scene, a silent promise of something new. And so, with his eyes fixed on the future but his feet firmly planted on that forgotten land, he took the first step toward transforming his fantasy into reality. A step that, though small, carried the weight of a dream that refused to disappear. Let this image settle within you. The silence of the island, the slow movement of the Danube, and the solitary figure of a man who chose to be king. A story that begins with an idea and unfolds on the banks of a river, where time itself seems to slow down. Imagine a man who, for years, quietly nurtured a peculiar, almost secret dream. A dream that needed neither applause nor recognition, only his own faith. Jean-Pierre Brunius had prepared himself to bring to life something that, until then, existed only in the pages of old maps and in the depths of his imagination. His island in the middle of the Danube, a place that, to him, represented the possibility of being a king. The visit he planned came with no announcement, no invitation, no crowd. It was a discreet journey, almost an intimate ritual between the man and the land he had chosen to be his kingdom. With a rented boat, on a calm day, he set off in silence, gliding over the still waters of the river, while the sun cast a gentle light that touched the surface of the waves like a delicate embrace. As he approached the island, expectation mingled with serenity. It was not just the realization of an idea. It was the materialization of a dream that crossed time and space, a quiet step into the unknown. The boat moved slowly, and he watched the nearing shores, breathing in the purer air, listening to the sounds of nature, and feeling the absence of the world's pressures. Upon disembarking, the touch of the earth beneath his feet stirred a contained, almost reverent emotion. The island was exactly as he had imagined, overgrown with grass, scattered stones, a modest space, yet with an energy that seemed to welcome him. There, in the midst of the silent nature, he found the perfect stage for his improbable reign. Jean-Pierre was not a man of grand displays. He did not build castles or raise monuments. Instead, he chose simplicity, a light tent easily assembled and dismantled, symbolizing what was ephemeral and yet sacred. A handmade flag, with colors that represented his vision of freedom and peace. In that moment, he made a silent vow, a commitment to himself and to his dream. Without spectators, without official witnesses, he declared himself king of Enclava, a symbolic act, yet charged with deep meaning. It was a promise to create a place where imagination could flourish, where power would be exercised not by force, but by the serene will of a man. The visit was brief but unforgettable. Jean-Pierre captured the moment with simple photographs, using an improvised tripod. He wore clothes that, to him, symbolized royalty, discreet attire, yet loaded with personal meaning. The images were modest, but full of poetry, revealing the beauty of a dream that, though small, resisted the storms of the world. Later, he created a minimalist website to share the story of the kingdom of Enclava. He did not seek fame, he only wanted his idea to exist in the virtual space, so that others could, in some way, take part in that calm and delicate fantasy. The island was his territory, but the dream was already beginning to spread beyond the banks of the Danube. And so, in the silence of that forgotten island, between the murmur of the waters and the whisper of the trees, Jean-Pierre Brunius gave life to an invisible kingdom, where time moved at the pace of imagination, and sovereignty was measured by the weight of dreams. Let this scene rest in your mind, a solitary man, a lost island, a humble tent, and a flag fluttering in the wind. A kingdom that does not exist on official maps, but lives in the quiet essence of someone who dared to dream. After the silent visit to the forgotten island in the middle of the Danube, something changed inside Jean-Pierre Brunius. What had once been only a distant idea and a quiet desire now took shape and name. There, among the murmur of the waters and the gentle breeze that passed through the trees, the kingdom of Enclava was born, a place that, though invisible to the official world, existed with a palpable force in the heart of its creator. The name Enclava carried a meaning both delicate and powerful. It was a word that evoked isolation and uniqueness, but also protection and refuge. A space that did not need to prove itself before great nations, nor compete for recognition. Enclava was a kingdom made to be felt, to exist in the stillness of dreams and the peace of imagination. Jean-Pierre devoted himself to creating the symbols that would give this new country its identity. Every detail was carefully considered, almost like a sacred ritual, a way of turning abstraction into something tangible. He designed a flag, simple yet full of meaning, with colors that reflected the serenity of the Danube waters and the hope for a world without conflict. The coat of arms, in turn, featured elements that spoke of courage, freedom, and balance. They were symbols that, though modest, represented the essence of the kingdom, the pursuit of a place where peace reigned, and where power was exercised with wisdom and calm. Each line was a silent declaration of intent, an invitation to anyone willing to imagine alongside him. He didn't stop there. Jean-Pierre created his own currency, not for commercial use, but as a symbol of Enclave's autonomy and identity. Coins that could be touched and kept, physical mementos of a country that existed more in spirit than on official maps. Passports were another act of imagination. Documents crafted with care, bearing the seal of the kingdom and a royal signature in his own hand. Passports that did not serve to cross borders, but to cross the limits of reality, inviting their citizens into a territory where imagination was the only law. Finally, Jean-Pierre wrote a symbolic constitution, a brief text that laid out the kingdom's values and principles. There were no rigid laws, only guidelines for respect, harmony, and freedom. A charter for an ideal world, where each person could be sovereign over themselves, and where power was not a tool of control but of care. The birth of the Kingdom of Enclave was a silent and profound act of creation, a gesture of poetic courage, made not for the eyes of the world, but for the heart of anyone who believes in the power of ideas. An invitation to slow down and reflect on what it means to be sovereign, not only over a territory, but over one's own life. It is striking to think that, in times of war and conflict, Jean-Pierre chose to build his kingdom precisely where silence and peace prevailed. A kingdom that existed on the fringe of geography, and perhaps for that very reason, was more real than many others, for it was born from stillness and dream. Let this image settle slowly within you. The flag fluttering in the gentle wind, the coins glowing with a soft light, the passports waiting for hands willing to embrace the impossible. A kingdom that needs no armies to exist, only the quiet strength of a dream that refuses to die. In the heart of the Kingdom of Enclave, wrapped in the stillness of the island and the whispering waters of the Danube, Jean-Pierre Brunius took a profound and solemn step, the oath to become king. A gesture that, to many, might seem strange or even naive, but which, for him, carried a vast and quiet meaning, something that went far beyond the pomp and circumstance of traditional coronations. This oath was not made for audiences, nor accompanied by trumpets or applause. It was an intimate commitment, a promise whispered to the wind, a pact between the man and his dream, engraved not in stone but in the depths of his being. It was the declaration of a sovereignty born from silence, reflection, and a steady will. In taking this oath, Jean-Pierre assumed for himself the responsibility of caring for the space that was now his kingdom, not with the intention of ruling, but of protecting. He understood that being a king is not merely to bear a title, but to accept the arduous task of being the guardian of an ideal, even if that ideal exists only on the delicate frontier between reality and imagination. In the real world, coronations are marked by elaborate rituals and great crowds. In Enclave, the ceremony was reduced to the simplicity of a moment, a silent gesture, an inward word, a bow to himself and to the land that welcomed him. It was as if the very air carried the solemnity of that instant, filling the space with a calm and powerful energy. Jean-Pierre had nothing to prove to anyone. His kingdom sought no recognition on official maps, nor validation from international bodies. He knew that true sovereignty resides in conviction, in the courage to embrace who we are and what we desire, even when the world seems blind to us. This silent oath was also an act of resistance, a subtle reply to the relentless logic of nations, rigid borders, and endless disputes. Enclava existed as a counterpoint, a place where peace and imagination outweighed conflict and imposition. And in that chosen solitude, the king found a kind of freedom few ever know. The freedom to be the author of his own laws, to create meanings, and to build a place that, though invisible to others, held life and soul for him. It is a delicate reflection to consider that, sometimes, the greatest royalty is not found in castles or thrones, but in the inner silence, in the ability to commit to a dream and make it a refuge, a sanctuary. As the wind softly moved the flag of Enclava, as if saluting that commitment, Jean-Pierre looked toward the horizon, feeling himself king not by decree, but by choice, by a calm act of courage that no map could ever record. This moment is the heart of the story, the proof that, even in the simplest and most solitary circumstances, there can be a true kingship. A kingship made of dream, silence, and a deep will. Let this feeling rest in you like a gentle breeze that touches the face and soothes the soul, the silent oath of a solitary king who chose his path in the midst of stillness, creating a kingdom where words needed no crowds to exist. After the silent oath came the need to give visible form to the dream. Jean-Pierre Brunius, even in his discreet kingship, knew that symbols are powerful. They are what transform an abstract idea into something that can be touched by memory and seen by the eye, even if only his own. It was then that, with a simplicity so dear to him, he set up a modest tent in the center of that forgotten island, a humble shelter of canvas and wood, where the silence seemed to condense into something tangible, almost sacred. That tent, so fragile before the winds of the Danube, became the first palace of Enclava, a space where the dream took shape, small and temporary though it might be. Beside the tent, the flag fluttered gently. Handcrafted with the colors that represented the kingdom, it was not merely a piece of fabric, but a promise of peace, of freedom, and of imagination. The flag was the standard of that dream, the visible symbol of a place that existed beyond official borders, in the delicate realm of personal creation. Even alone, Jean-Pierre felt the need to record that moment, not to display it, but to immortalize in images the birth of a kingdom. With an improvised tripod and his modest camera, he took photographs that were more than simple records. They were silent declarations, images that showed the solitary tent amid nature, the flag rippling in the wind, and himself, dressed in garments chosen not for ostentation, but for personal meaning. In those photographs, there were no exaggerations, no poses. There was calm, contemplation, and a deep respect for the space he had created. Jean-Pierre was no king of red carpets or gleaming crowns. He was a king of simplicity, imagination, and patience. These images, published on a modest website he built himself, began to draw the attention of curious souls and dreamers from around the world. People who saw in that story not eccentricity, but quiet poetry, an invitation to consider that perhaps sovereignty does not need to be recognized by others to truly exist. The tent, the flag, and the photographs became the first visual chapters of the kingdom of Enclava, a kingdom that was born shyly, almost timidly, but with a clear and profound identity. a kingdom that existed not on any official map, but in the heartfelt memory of its creator and of those who, even from afar, felt touched by its story. Let this image settle within you. The tent in the wind, the flag swaying gently, a serene and determined man, and the silence of the island as witness. A kingdom invisible to the world, yet luminous in the heart of those who dream. After Jean-Pierre Brunius shared the first photos and stories of the kingdom of Enclava on the internet, something unexpected began to happen. That solitary dream, born in the silence of a forgotten island, started to draw the attention of people from around the world. Curious souls, dreamers, and even lovers of poetic absurdity. At first, the messages came timidly, digital letters and emails filled with admiration and wonder. People who had never heard of that island, but felt moved by the idea of a kingdom that existed solely through the strength of a dream and the serene will of one man. They were individuals who, in some way, sought to be part of that quiet story. Jean-Pierre, with his discreet nature, replied to each message with the same care and attention he had dedicated to his own dream. He sent digital citizenship certificates, each one signed by hand and stamped with the seal of the Kingdom of Enclava. Every document was a small work of art, a symbol of belonging to something greater, even if it existed only in the imagination. And so the citizens of Enclava were born, people scattered across the globe, connected by an invisible bond made of poetry, hope, and the desire to believe in something different. People who identified not with borders or official flags, but with the sharing of a common, gentle dream. These virtual citizens exchanged letters, stories, and dreams, forming a small community that transcended the physical space of the island. They were, in a way, guardians of the invisible kingdom, keeping alive the flame of imagination and freedom. This wave of interest brought Jean-Pierre a quiet surprise. His dream, which had seemed so intimate and private, had touched other hearts. A gentle reminder that, often, the most discreet stories are the ones that resonate deepest in the human soul. Even in the face of online recognition, Jean-Pierre remained modest, avoiding public appearances and keeping to his calm rhythm. For him, the Kingdom of Enclava was never about fame, but about the beauty of silent creation and the freedom to be oneself, even if only for oneself. Let this idea settle in you. A man and his kingdom, and an invisible community of citizens who share a common dream. An invitation to reflect on how, sometimes, we belong to places that do not appear on maps, yet live within the heart. Gradually, the story of Jean-Pierre Brunius and his Kingdom of Enclava ceased to be a secret kept only by the silence of the island and the small group of virtual citizens. The Internet, with its power to spread ideas, carried this unusual narrative to the eyes of the European press, which, fascinated by the uniqueness of the case, began to highlight the banker who became king. The first articles were discreet, almost curious, told with a tone of lightness and surprise. Intrigued journalists reported the existence of a man who, instead of seeking conventional wealth or power, chose to found an imaginary kingdom on a forgotten island in the Danube. To many, it seemed like a story taken from a fairy tale, a calm fantasy amid the chaos of the modern world. Over time, the articles gained more space and reach. The narrative made headlines, sparked comments, and even written interviews, always respectful, as Jean-Pierre avoided appearing in public, preferring to keep his kingdom away from the spotlight. The press, enchanted by the poetry of the story, highlighted the contrast between the sobriety of the banker and the boldness of his dream. This repercussion brought forth a reflection on what it really means to have a territory and be sovereign. After all, Jean-Pierre did not have official recognition, but he had created a space, even if symbolic, where he exercised a unique form of power, the power of imagination and personal will. To the outside world, the kingdom of Enclava was a mixture of curiosity and light exoticism, a small island of calm amid global turbulences. For Jean-Pierre, however, the press attention did not change the essence of what he had created. He remained firm in his silence and modesty, aware that his kingdom was, above all, a work of dream and delicacy. This visibility, albeit timid, also brought challenges. After all, a kingdom that exists on the margins of conventions provokes varied reactions. Some smiled at the idea, others treated it as eccentricity, and others, finally, wondered about the real implications of that initiative. But amid all this, the most impressive thing was to see how the story of a man and his island managed to touch so many hearts, awakening the desire to slow down, reflect, and dream a little more. Now, as this story follows its course, we can see that Jean-Pierre, the banker who became king, achieved more than a symbolic title. He created a silent legacy, a delicate reminder that sometimes the deepest power lies in serenity and the act of dreaming calmly. Let this idea settle within you. The news reaching the newspapers, the image of a simple man who became king of an invisible kingdom, and the world, even if distant, recognizing the beauty of that tranquil dream. The story of Jean-Pierre Brunius and his kingdom of Enclava did not remain isolated for long. As the news spread, a curious phenomenon began to emerge. Other people around the world, equally fascinated by the idea of creating their own small kingdoms, micronations, or symbolic territories, started to gravitate toward Enclava, not always physically, but certainly in the realm of ideas and silent solidarity. These micronationalists, as they came to be called, formed a scattered community composed of individuals who, for different reasons, sought a space of their own, a place to express their identity, their beliefs, or simply their desire to dream. Some created flags, currencies, and official documents. Others devised constitutions and symbolic laws, but all shared the same peaceful restlessness and spirit of creation. Jean-Pierre, with his reserved nature, saw in this approach an opportunity to strengthen his project, not with political ambitions or power, but as an invitation to a gentle dialogue among these kings without thrones. He began exchanging messages, letters, and even virtual meetings with some of them, building a network of imaginary kingdoms that, despite being dispersed, shared values of peace, respect, and creativity. This union did not arise by imposition, but by the natural affinity among those who chose to walk outside traditional maps. Online forums dedicated to discussing life in micronations, their laws, customs, and challenges emerged. Amid serene debates and shared laughter, these small kingdoms built a kind of symbolic community, an ecosystem of dreams strengthened by delicacy and imagination. What stands out is the absence of competition or conflict among these micronationalists. On the contrary, there was mutual respect, a silent understanding that each kingdom, no matter how ephemeral or imaginary, had its value and reason for existence. It was as if, in the silence of these creations, there existed a pact of harmony and freedom. Jean-Pierre, no longer alone, became a central figure in this network, not an authoritarian leader, but a reference point for those seeking inspiration and courage to keep creating. His kingdom of Enclava, born on the banks of the Danube, was seen as a symbol of this peaceful and dreamy resistance. Allow yourself to imagine this invisible community, kingdoms spread across the world, united by dreams and symbolic gestures, connected by kind words and silent exchanges. A delicate network where everyone can be king of their own universe, without this meaning the downfall of another. This story invites us to reflect on the power of ideas and solidarity, even when expressed so softly and discreetly. Because sometimes, the greatest revolution is in choosing to be who we are, and in finding companionship among those who also decided to dream. When the news of the kingdom of Enclava and the existence of Jean-Pierre Brunius spread, the reaction from the outside world was as diverse as the waters of the Danube that bathed his silent island. There were discreet laughs, condescending smiles, but also curious glances and hearts touched by the delicacy of this unusual story. Many saw in the idea of the banker who decided to become a king a charming eccentricity, almost a light-hearted joke for heavy days. Headlines played with the poetic absurdity of that tiny imaginary nation, a country that no one recognized, but that existed, at least in the fragile space between reality and dream. Still, there were those who were enchanted. Those who, tired of the fierce disputes between real countries, saw in Enclava a kind of symbolic refuge. A place where there were no wars, no taxes, no borders to limit the imagination. A kingdom where sovereignty was exercised with kindness and silence, where power was, above all, a personal choice. This silent enchantment turned Jean-Pierre's story into a small urban legend, told in cafes, blogs, and discreet gatherings, like a precious secret for those seeking a pause from the frantic pace of the world. Enclava became a delicate symbol of the freedom to dream, of the possibility to create a space of one's own even where no one would expect it. It is fascinating to think how such a modest gesture, a kingdom created on a forgotten island, with a tent, a flag, and a handful of symbolic documents, could awaken so many emotions, laughs, and reflections. Because deep down, this story touches a universal point: the human need for belonging, for meaning, and for autonomy. Among the laughter the story provoked, there was also a silent invitation to look beyond the obvious, to realize that not all sovereignty needs to be official to be real. That sometimes, the most important thing is not to have recognition on paper, but to keep alive the flame of dream and imagination. And so, while the world laughed, it also was enchanted. And in that subtle space between a smile and admiration, the kingdom of Enclava existed, strong and calm, a reminder that imagination can be the widest and truest territory anyone can ever conquer. Let this feeling gently settle within you, a world that, between laughter and enchantment, chooses to recognize the beauty of simplicity and the silent dream. An invitation to slow down and contemplate the poetry hidden in the small rebellions of the soul. As time went on, the delicacy of Jean-Pierre Brunius's dream began to face the rigidity of the real world. The small island in the Danube, silent and forgotten, became the stage for an unexpected presence. Patrol boats from Serbian and Romanian authorities began to navigate near the coast, carefully watching the territory Jean-Pierre called his kingdom. There was no uproar, no explosive confrontations. On the contrary, the approach was discreet, almost procedural, a silent invitation for the king to understand the limits of his claim. The patrol boats were symbols of state power, surveillance, and order, a physical presence that contrasted with the serenity of the island and the calm of its lone inhabitant. Jean-Pierre observed the activity with a mixture of resignation and serenity. There was no resistance, no protest. The tent he had set up was taken down, the flag carefully folded and stored away. A symbolic gesture, as if the kingdom itself were being invited to vanish. to return to the silence that had once surrounded its existence. The wind kept blowing, carrying the stories of the Danube, while the stone and brush of the island seemed to absorb the presence of the visitors. For the authorities, it was a practical matter, ensuring that borders were respected and that national sovereignty remained intact. For Jean-Pierre, that moment marked another chapter in his dream, a phase where real-world geography imposed itself, but where the essence of the kingdom of Enclava remained alive, perhaps now only in memory, in the letters and documents he had given to his citizens. The visit from the patrol boats was brief, quiet, and full of meaning, a concrete reminder that even the most delicate and peaceful dreams can face barriers when they encounter the harsh reality of borders and laws. And yet, the end of that visit did not mean the end of the kingdom. The kingdom of Enclava endured as an idea, as poetry, as an invisible space where imagination reigned supreme. Over time, the delicacy of Jean-Pierre Brunius's dream began to face the rigidity of the real world. The small island in the Danube, silent and forgotten, became the stage for an unexpected presence. Patrol boats from Serbian and Romanian authorities started sailing near the shore, watching the territory that Jean-Pierre called his kingdom with close attention. There was no uproar, no explosive confrontations. On the contrary, the approach was discreet, almost procedural. A silent invitation for the king to understand the limits of his claim. The patrol boats were symbols of state power, surveillance, and order, a physical presence contrasting with the serenity of the island and the calm of its occupant. Jean-Pierre watched that movement with a mixture of resignation and serenity. There was no resistance, no protests. The tent he had set up was taken down, and the flag carefully folded away. A symbolic gesture, as if the kingdom itself was invited to disappear, to return to the silence that surrounded it before its existence. The wind kept blowing, carrying the stories of the Danube, while the sea of stone and brush seemed to absorb the presence of the visitors. For the authorities, it was a practical matter, ensuring that the borders were respected, maintaining intact national sovereignty. For Jean-Pierre, that moment was just another chapter of his dream, a phase in which real geography asserted itself, but where the essence of the kingdom of Enclava remained alive, now perhaps only in memory, in the letters and documents he distributed to his citizens. The visit of the patrol boats was brief, silent, and full of meaning. A concrete reminder that even the most delicate and peaceful dreams can meet barriers when facing the harsh reality of borders and laws. And yet, the end of that visit did not mean the end of the kingdom. The kingdom of Enclava endured as an idea, as poetry, as an invisible space where imagination was sovereign. Allow this scene to settle within you. The tranquility of the island before their arrival, the subtle cut of official order, the removal of the flags, and the silence that returns, deep and full of memories. After the silent visit of the patrol boats and the physical removal of the flags, Jean-Pierre Brunius returned to his everyday refuge, where the dream of the kingdom of Enclava no longer had space on the official map, but remained alive in his mind and in his gestures. There, in his small apartment, he watched the unfolding of the world, observing on television what could be considered the end of his throne, or rather, the end of what he had physically built. It was a scene full of symbolism and serenity. While the real world presented its news, with wars, crises, and political disputes, Jean-Pierre contemplated the silence of the island that had once been his kingdom. There was no fight, no resistance. Just a calm gaze, a peaceful acceptance that not every dream finds space in the geography of men. The television showed images that, for many, were dramatic. For him, it was the confirmation that his kingdom existed in another dimension, one of ideas, feelings, and imagination. The throne he lost was not made of stone or metal, but a throne built of dreams, constructed with the patience of quiet moments. In that instant, Jean-Pierre was not a defeated king, but a dreamer who knew that, despite the physical end, the essence of what he created would never disappear. Because a kingdom born in the heart and will of someone, even without official recognition, endures like a flame that refuses to be extinguished. This silent contemplation is an invitation to think about the many forms of sovereignty. Sovereignty exercised over territories may be fleeting, but sovereignty over one's own dreams and ideas is eternal. While the TV broadcast the headlines of the real world, Jean-Pierre allowed himself a soft smile, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for having dared to dream, for having built a kingdom where calm and imagination reigned, even if only for a short time. Let this image rest within you, a calm man, a distant, empty island, and the serene certainty that what is true in the heart is never completely lost. Even with the silence that enveloped the island and the absence of official recognition, Jean-Pierre Brunius never fully abandoned his role as king. Years later, in his small refuge far from the bustle of the world, he continued to respond to the letters sent by those who, in one way or another, identified with the kingdom of Enclava. The letters arrived from all over the world, filled with kind words, curious questions, and a genuine desire to be part of that small invisible community. People were seeking more than a piece of land or a document. They were seeking a connection, a symbol, a story to hold close to the heart. With patience and care, Jean-Pierre replied to each one. His responses were not mere formalities, but small acts of attention, marked by careful handwriting, a personal seal, and often a royal salutation written in blue ink. Each returned letter was a confirmation that, despite the passing years and shifting times, the dream of Enclava still lived on. This delicate gesture made Jean-Pierre more than just a founder. He was the guardian of an idea, a living link between the real world and the invisible kingdom he had created. Through these letters, the symbolic community maintained its quiet rhythm, a steady flow of affection and mutual recognition. For many, this continuity was a comfort, proof that even if a dream does not fully materialize in the physical world, it can endure through time, sustained by attention and affection. In this sense, Jean-Pierre became an example of how personal sovereignty and the creation of meaning can transcend material boundaries. The image of that man, sitting at his desk, writing letters with calm and dedication, is a portrait of serene resistance. A reminder that, sometimes, the truest royalty lies in the ability to keep what is precious alive, even when no one else seems to notice. As the seasons changed outside and the world continued its hurried course, the king of Enclava carried on with his quiet task, weaving together past and present, reality and dream, with the gentleness of someone who knows that certain legacies are built in silence. Even amid the silence that surrounded the island and the absence of official recognition, Jean-Pierre Brunius never completely abandoned his role as king. Years later, in his small refuge far from the bustle of the world, he continued to answer the letters sent by those who, in some way, identified with the kingdom of Enclava. The letters arrived from all parts of the world, filled with kind words, curious questions, and a genuine desire to be part of that small invisible community. People who sought more than a piece of land or a document. They sought a connection, a symbol, a story to keep in their hearts. With patience and care, Jean-Pierre replied to each one. His responses were not mere formalities but small acts of tenderness, marked by careful handwriting, a unique seal, and often a royal greeting written in blue ink. Each returned letter was a confirmation that, despite the years and changes, the dream of Enclava remained alive. This delicate gesture made Jean-Pierre more than a founder. He was the guardian of an idea, a living link between the real world and the invisible kingdom he had created. Through these letters, the symbolic community maintained its quiet rhythm, a constant flow of affection and mutual recognition. For many, this continuity was a comfort, proof that even if a dream does not fully materialize in the physical world, it can persist through time, nourished by attention and affection. In this sense, Jean-Pierre became an example of how personal sovereignty and the creation of meaning can transcend material limits. The image of that man, sitting at his desk, writing letters calmly and devotedly, is a portrait of serene resistance. A reminder that sometimes the greatest royalty lies in the ability to keep alive what is precious, even when no one else seems to notice. As the seasons changed outside, and the world hurried on its course, the king of Enclava continued his silent task, weaving past and present, reality and dream, with the delicacy of one who knows certain legacies are built in silence. Let this image rest within you. The hand that writes, the seal that stamps, the gentle word that crosses time, keeping alive a kingdom that never needed recognition to exist. Reflecting on the kingdom of Enclava is, above all, to dive into the subtle boundaries between the real and the imaginary. Where does the land we can touch end, and where does the territory of ideas begin? Where does a country truly start? In its physical borders, in the laws that govern it, or in the will of those who inhabit it, even if only with their hearts? Jean-Pierre Brunius invites us to think that sovereignty does not reside solely in official recognition, treaties, and borders drawn with ink and paper. It can also be born from the silent courage to dream, to build a space that, even invisible to the eyes of the world, is real for those who feel it. The kingdom of Enclava, with its tent, its flag, its imaginary passports, exists in this threshold. It is a country that does not appear on geographic maps but beats strongly in the memories and letters of its citizens. A territory created with the ink of imagination but carrying a profound truth, the truth that every country is, above all, a shared idea. It is fascinating to realize that, throughout history, the notion of a country has always been linked to a collective construction of meaning. Borders are social conventions, laws are agreements, and national identity is a fabric of stories, symbols, and feelings. Thus, what Jean-Pierre did was, in a way, to return to the roots of sovereignty, to the place where everything begins, in the dream. This reflection invites a gentle gaze, a slowing down to perceive that countries, like people, have multiple layers, and that perhaps the most important thing is not what is seen but what is felt and shared. The kingdom of Enclava is, therefore, a subtle invitation to think about other forms of belonging, other ways of existing. A reminder that true sovereignty can be internal, made of choices and silent passions, and that a country, after all, can be born in the infinite space of imagination. Let this idea rest within you like a calm breeze crossing invisible borders, carrying with it the understanding that the real and the imaginary often intertwine in a delicate and profound way. Jean-Pierre Brunius, the man who built an island to be king, may never have won the official recognition he dreamed of. He never had the glory of traditional thrones, nor the power of a recognized sovereign. But there is something greater in his quiet and delicate journey, something that transcends physical territory and the conventions of the real world. He was, in many ways, the last king of the Danube, not because he ruled with power or wealth, but because he dared to reign over a kingdom built by imagination, calm, and poetry. A king who understood that true royalty lies not in crowns or laws, but in the courage to dream and create, even if no one else sees it. The kingdom of Enclava was his act of resistance against haste, against the relentless logic of the modern world. A space where serenity reigned, where power was silent and gentle, and where sovereignty was a personal, delicate, and profound choice. While the Danube continued its eternal course, carrying stories back and forth, the island remained a discreet symbol of the strength of dreams. A reminder to us all that sometimes the greatest achievement is to create something that exists only in will, but has a real impact on the soul. Jean-Pierre did not need recognition to be king. His throne was the peace he found in his own creation. His crown was the serenity of accepting what is fleeting, and his kingdom was an invitation for others to find freedom in imagination as well. Thus, while the waters of the Danube keep flowing, the last king remains silent, accompanied only by the memory of his island and the invisible presence of his citizens. A delicate, almost forgotten story that reaches you today, so that, perhaps, it might inspire your own journey of dreams. And so we come to the end of the story of the man who, in silence, built an island to be king. Jean-Pierre Brunius leaves us with a rare and delicate lesson, that true power can be far from the noise of big cities, away from disputes and spotlights. It may reside in the deep calm of a dream nurtured with patience, in the serenity of one who chooses to be master of himself, even if the world does not recognize his kingdom. This almost forgotten story reminds us that there are invisible territories that hold the greatest riches, not those measured in gold or official lands, but those found in the imagination, in the heart, in the silent will to belong to something greater, even if that something is just a piece of land forgotten by time and a dream that never needed confirmation. If this peaceful journey through the kingdom of Enclava touched something in you, a memory, a sigh, a desire to slow down and dream, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Your words are like a gentle echo, helping to build a community of listeners who value silence, reflection, and the enchantment of small yet great stories. And if this channel brings you this kind of calm and reflection, consider leaving a like and subscribing, not out of obligation, but because these gestures are like a breeze that keeps alive the flame of narratives that soothe the mind and nourish the soul. That way, you help keep alive this space where sleepy and almost forgotten stories find their place. Now, close your eyes. Let this real absurdity fade away in the midst of the mist of your dreams. Good night.